day. I want to extend a very warm thank you to the Austin Historical Society, Gabby and Bill Burton,
Joe Burton.
Joe.
I just run for office.
Different Burton. Police chief. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for opening the doors and the lawn and so on with your hospitality. Last year I visited Seneca Falls, and we were having a discussion about how some others have visited Seneca Falls in New York. I was up there for a women's equality conference, and the trip really made me think about our state's rich history as the epicenter for the women's rights movement. And there were a lot of women that over time from this area have been very involved with women's suffrage and women's issues. It also reminded me that many of the rights we have today can so easily be taken for granted. It is so important that we pay homage to those brave, bold women who paved the way for us and for the next generation of girls and women. And after being denied entry to an anti-slavery convention in London in 1840, it's so interesting that they were in London at a convention there, they couldn't get in. So the suffragettes gathered in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. It's a long time ago. And their suffragettes wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, which, as you will all hear today, lays out our inequities in the law that seemed outrageous by today's standards. And yet, this is the reality for women living in our country at that time. It's hard, when you read these, you realize, oh my goodness, we've come a long way. And so we're going to talk more about the women's role in our nation's history. And I've asked Austin historian Dana White to give us a presentation.
It's the most I've ever felt like a village historian. Standing with the stairs, I love it. Abigail Adams, who would serve as the second First Lady of the United States from 1797 to 1801, was known for her progressive views, especially in the area of women's rights. But no amount of privilege could change the fact that she was a woman, and thus would not be able to vote in the new country that her husband and the other founding fathers were in the process of assembling. In 1776, with the colonies entering a war with England, as John Adams and the other members of the Continental Congress were writing the rules of the new republic, Abigail wrote her husband a letter. It read in part, "I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And, by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies, and to be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power in the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion." And indeed, as Abigail Adams promised, that rebellion began in the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848. This event was organized by Lucretia Mott, a Philadelphia Quaker known for her oratory skills at a time when women were supposed to be quiet, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a brilliant mother of four from an elite Massachusetts family. It took place over 2 days in July in upstate New York and attracted hundreds of women and some men as well, including Frederick Douglass. Stanton wrote a Declaration of Sentiments, a feminist version of the Declaration of Independence. It read, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal." It listed 16 grievances of men's tyranny over women, the first being he has not ever permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. Before Seneca Falls, early women's rights advocates had focused on abolition and temperance, but now voting rights were on the list of demands. Interestingly, one important woman did not attend the Seneca Falls Convention, and that was Susan B. Anthony. She was a headstrong Quaker from upstate New York and more concerned with other causes than voting rights. But after meeting Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she signed on to the suffrage fight and became its boldest advocate. Stanton's writing skills and Anthony's activism made a formidable team. The irony is that while women couldn't vote for elected officials, they could run for elected office. Stanton used this loophole to make a point. In 1866, she ran as an independent candidate for Congress in New York's 8th congressional district. She basically said, even though I have no voting record, I believe in free speech, free press, free men, and free trade, the cardinal point of democracy. Out of 12,000 votes, she got 24. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony and 25 other women showed up at the polls in Rochester, New York to vote in the presidential election. Anthony voted for the incumbent, Ulysses S. Grant. The women were arrested, and Anthony was put on trial for illegal voting. In a circus sideshow of a trial, she was convicted by an all-male jury and fined $100, which she refused to pay. Meanwhile, out west, suffragists were chipping away at the voting day with the help of male allies. In the 1880s and 90s, the Western territories and states were the first to give women the right to vote. One reason is that they hoped to lure more women out west. Another reason is that there simply weren't enough people otherwise to hold valid elections. This led to a rise of female candidates at all levels of government. And this led to the rise of women who wrote the laws that helped other women live better and more equal lives. While Wyoming was the first territory to grant women the vote in 1890, Colorado was the first state to allow women to vote in popular elections in 1893. A year later, 3 women were elected to the Colorado House of Representatives, becoming the first female legislators in the country. The suffrage movement created women politicians. But by 1900, only 8 states, all of them out west, had granted women full suffrage rights. Around that time, Carrie Chapman Catt succeeded Susan B. Anthony as the leader of the National Woman Suffrage Association. Catt came up with the winning strategy to win suffrage state by state. When it came to recruiting volunteers, running campaigns, and giving speeches, she had no peer. Millions of women flocked to the cause. Massive parades and demonstrations took place. The Women's Suffrage Procession of 1913, where hundreds of thousands of women marched on Washington, D.C., was the first organized march on Washington for a political cause, but it was certainly not the last. The suffragists began to wear white as a unifying tone and to convey that their motives were cleansing and good, not demonic and threatening, as many feared. And as with any large movement, there was dissent in the ranks, competing organizations and agendas, but in the end they united for a common cause. In 1912, a group of 100 women walked from New York City to Albany in the dead of winter for suffrage rights. They marched along Route 9, which means they walked straight through Ossining. Local leaders like Elizabeth Underhill, president of the Ossining Suffrage Association, and Narcissa Vanderlip, the progressive wife of financier Frank Vanderlip, marched in parades together down Fifth Avenue. And they probably joined in with those marchers as they struggled up Route 9 through the snow to Albany. Carrie Chapman Catt, who lived in Ossining in the 20s and 30s, personally convinced Woodrow Wilson to support a national amendment giving women the right to vote. On June 4th, 1919, Congress passed the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, and it was sent to the states for ratification. They needed 36 states to sign on, but the southern states were defiantly opposed. It was Tennessee that finally put them over the top, thanks to a 23-year-old state representative whose mother made him vote for the amendment. True story. It should be interesting about Mississippi only ratified the 19th Amendment in 1984.
Oh my God. That sounds crazy.
On August 26, 1920, the Secretary of State certified the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which prohibits states and federal government from denying voting rights to citizens on the basis of gender. More than 8 million women voted that year. And of course, 65 million people voted for Hillary Clinton, about half of them, at least more than half of them women. Today, as we read the document that jump-started women's suffrage and galvanized the women's movement, we recognize that we cannot be complacent. We must continue to fight to maintain this right against forces that would disenfranchise us and erode the rights our sisters fought so hard for. We recognize ourselves as the spiritual descendants of the strong, relentless, and determined women who throughout this nation's history have advocated and agitated for progress toward a more perfect and more equal union. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana, for that wonderful history, and of course it incorporated a lot of people that lived in this area who were extremely involved. And so these women at that Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 modeled, as Dana has said, their Declaration of Sentiments after the Declaration of Independence, listing all of the grievances of women who were not seen as equal to men under the law. And this declaration was the inspiration, obviously, for the suffrage movement that lasted into the late 1910s, where women mobilized to convince male voters and congressmen to pass an amendment allowing women the right to vote. And it was passed in Congress in 1919, 100 years ago. So we're here today to read this section, aloud the sections. And I'm going to ask the following people to come up. And Maureen Fleming, who is Kent Town Supervisor, Putnam, it's Kent in Putnam County. She came the furthest, so she's got the longest section to read. Okay, Catherine Borgia, County Legislator. Catherine Yost and Riley McKenzie, who are two of my interns from this summer. Susanna Reich, a children's book author, and award-winning lots of things. Dana Levenberg, our Austin Town Supervisor. Come on this way. Victoria Garrity, Mayor of the Village of Austin. And if there are any other women in the audience, I know Jen Toole is going to come up. We'll just have you come up and add to our discussion here. We have lots of sentiments to read. So let's start out with the first. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that which they have hitherto occupied, but one to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to such a course. Maureen?
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it, and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they were accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. Patrick?
The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man towards women, having a direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over them. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. Having deprived her of the first right as a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has compressed her on all sides. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right and property, even to the wages she earns.
He has made her morally an irresponsible being, as she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided they be done in the presence of her husband. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming to all intents and purposes her master, the law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer chastisement.
He has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes of divorce in case of separation, to whom the guardianship of the children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of the women, the law in all cases going upon a false supposition of the supremacy of man and giving all power into his hands.
After depriving her of her rights as a married woman, if single and the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable to her.
He has monopolized nearly all of the profitable employments, and from those she is permitted to follow, she receives but a scanty remuneration. He closes her all the avenues to wealth and distinction, which he considers most honorable to himself. As a teacher of theology, medicine, or law, she is not known.
He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He allows her in church as well as state, but a subordinate position, claiming apoplectic authority for her exclusion from the ministry, and with some exceptions from any public participation in the affairs of the church.
He has created a false public sentiment by giving to the world a different code of morals for men and women, by which moral delinquencies which exclude women from society are not only tolerated, but deemed of little account in men.
He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her a sphere of action when that belongs to her conscience and her God. He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life.
Now, in view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of these United States.
In entering upon the great work before us, we anticipate no small amount of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule, but we shall use every instrumentality within our power to effect our object. We shall employ agents, circulate tracts, petition the state and national legislatures, and endeavor to enlist the pulpit and the press in our behalf. We hope this convention will be followed by a series of conventions embracing every part of the country.
Firmly relying upon the final triumph of the right and the true, we do this day affix our signatures to this declaration.
Can't imagine the feelings at the moment, but at the appointed hour, the meeting convened, the minutes have been read, the resolutions of the day before were read and taken up separately, some from their self-evident truth, elicited by little remark. Others, I love the way they speak. Okay, others, after some criticism, much debate, and some slight alterations, were finally passed by a large majority. And at the end of the evening session, Lucretia Mott offered and spoke to the following resolution. Resolved that the speedy success of our cause depends upon the zealous and untiring efforts of both men and women for the overthrow of the monopoly of the pulpit, and for the securing to women an equal participation with men in various trades, professions, and commerce. And then the resolution was adopted. Now remember, we said that it was the untiring efforts of men and women. David Carlucci, our state senator, was not around then, but he represents this community in the state senate, and we've asked him just to say some words about the importance of women, but also the importance of men in this whole process. And we do have some posters that talk about the men's role.
Thank you so much. This is a beautiful ceremony, and my only regret is that there's not the news covering this today, because this is something that needs to be reminded to everyone. And reading those sentiments, I think we're reminded of how far we've come, but how far we still have to go. And I've been blessed to have such a great partner in Sandy Galef in the legislature. And this year, we finally passed legislation. We call it banning wage history. And the idea there is that an employer can't ask you what your previous salary was. And until Sandy really brought it to my attention a few years ago, I didn't recognize this problem. And in researching it, we saw that, yes, women and people of color are held back because we now know that 80 cents to every dollar that a man makes, that's what a woman brings home. That's wrong in 2019. And by banning the salary history, we know that that can propel people not only immediately, but throughout their lives. And that's so important, the economics. One of the things that is disturbing about that is the fact that in New York State, women represent over 50% of the workforce. But yet, like we said, only brings home 80 cents to every dollar that a man makes. What's even worse is to think in New York State, the Empire State, the home of Wall Street, that right now, when we look at publicly traded companies and the makeups of those boards, that in New York State, only 18% of those boards are made up of women. And we now have legislation that I'm hopeful will pass this year that requires every publicly traded company in New York State to have at least one female member of the board. It's called gender diversity. And it's something we say, well, maybe we shouldn't have to legislate that. This is a floor that should be reached. And right now, only 4 states in the United States have gender diversity of female representation on publicly traded companies of more than 20%. We know that having that balance will be better not only for those companies in New York State, but that transitions into a better economy for us. And speaking of it, today we're talking about 100 years of giving women the right to vote. And that's something that we can't take for granted. And I know I'm speaking to a very intelligent crowd here that knows the importance of that, but we've been able to reform the laws here in New York State to make it easier than ever to vote. Not only to register to vote, but to come out to vote. And this year we know is an election year. Many people unfortunately forget that, but we can't let them this year. We have an opportunity in early voting, and that starts October 26th, right around the corner. And the opportunity is that all of us, we don't have to just say that day, hey, did you vote? We can tell them, ask them for 10 days. And then we can even check with the Board of Elections whether you voted or not. So let's use that energy. Let's remember the history, and let's not take it for granted. We see what happens when we sit back and take it easy. We got to put our pedal to the metal and make sure that we're progressing and not letting other forces, like a guy sitting in the White House, let them take away the rights that we've been able to cobble together over the years. We know we've come far, but we have much more work to do, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you to make these things a reality. Again, I want to thank Sandy Galef, the Historical Society, and everyone here in reliving and remembering the struggle that came before us and reminding us of how much work we have to do. Thank you so much.
Well, you did a good summation.
Thank
We
you.
have a lot to do.
Yes.
And there are a lot of bills in Albany that will make a difference. The wage history, Catherine Borgia,
Yes.
actually implemented in the county of Westchester, even before we did anything on the state already, which was really great. So, but it's just, you know, we do it piece by piece by piece, I guess, which they did back then, except they try to do it all at once, right, in their declaration. But I guess we need a declaration to be sure that, given that we have more than 2% higher number of women in New York State, we're 52%. And so we can really make a difference if we go out, and it's so important for everybody to be sure to go out and vote. Remember how hard it was to get a vote. And I'd like Joe Burton, if you would just like to come up, and we really thank you for letting us be here today, and maybe just tell us a little bit about what might be inside if anybody wants to go get warmed up.
The heat is on. The curator turned the heat on early, and I'd like to first of all welcome you to the Assemblywoman Historical Society Museum. We've been in business for a lot of years. I think this is our 88th year, and this is the 72nd year that we've been in, 42nd year, excuse me, that we've been in this building. The building was built, it's the Austin building, in 1872. With that, I'd like to give you a little political push. We are trying something new this year. We have a 50-50 going out. And inside is tickets for the 50-50. If you feel generous, please do that. Because as you walk in and you look up in the corner up there, in the left-hand corner of the building, well, our half is already spent. There's more than $1,000 for the winner, and we just spent $900 to fix that, so we're having it. But on the West Gallery is the DAR has set up a display. They will be here tonight with their potluck dinner. Susan will help you through the DAR. And on the East Gallery over here, my wife has set up your refreshments. And they're all diet-free, I'm sure. You know, enjoy them because I have to take them home and test them again. But again, I thank everybody for coming here. This building is open on the second Saturday of every month from 1 to 3. You see our open sign there. Please come in. When you come in, if you want to wander through the building, wander through the building. If you want to ask questions for me. Dana's also on the board. If she's going to be around, she can answer a few questions. So Norm is sitting at his desk, and if he doesn't move too well, I'm only kidding. He gets seated. He will answer a lot more questions than I have, but don't expect him to be on the second floor. All right? With that, I thank you. And
I just learned something from Norm MacDonald inside, is that when the women signed, if I got this right, maybe Dana can help me, the Declaration of Sentiments, they signed it with like Mrs. John Smith, which is very interesting. But it could have been a political reason for that, to get it passed. But who knows? Who knows? Anyway, and the League of Women Voters, do you want to, I know there's a candidates night I think, coming up in Ossining maybe Thursday night. I don't know whether you want to say anything about the importance of voting or what you have over there.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Yes, thank you all of you for coming today. We are hosting League of Women Voters Rivertowns is actually hosting a candidate forum at the library on Thursday evening, 7 p.m. So please come. We have a number of candidates there. We have flyers on the table, so feel free to pick that up before you leave. Hey, Virginia. And again, we can only reiterate the importance of getting out there to vote, and we encourage you to go out and test out the new early voting. Let's see how that works before 2020. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you. And now it's your opportunity to have a little bit of something inside and chat with your neighbors about what those women and men did in the 1800s, 1900s, and how we were impacted by it all. Thank you very much for coming.